Fenrir. A Paranormal Protector Tale. A Tale in the Heart of Ice series. Written by Demelza Carlton. 1. Tonight was the night Fenrir took his first steps along the path to be more than a thrall, he told himself, as he stepped inside the Jarl's longhouse. He could remember when it was the only longhouse, but now there were several, ringing the outer walls of the fort. "I brought you more wood for the fire, Miss Astrid," he said cheerfully, adding to the pile already stacked up against the wall. He'd grown bored of standing about on guard duty, so he'd picked up an axe and gone to work. No one could approach the door without him seeing, and he'd been able to do something useful too. Astrid looked up. "Thank you, Fenrir." She went back to brushing her hair. "You know, you could go and join the feast if you want. You don't need to keep me company. I can keep the fire burning here until Father is finished with his guests." "Even if I wanted to, I couldn't, Miss Astrid. I promised your father I would protect you, and I am true to my word." He drew himself up proudly. He knew his shoulders were not as broad as some of Jarl Eric's best warriors, or even Eric himself, but he knew it was only a matter of time. Eric's village was a prosperous one, where not even a thrall's son like Fenrir went hungry. "Surely you can protect me inside the longhouse just as well as outside. Come, sit by me and amuse me. Every musician and storyteller in the village is at the feast, entertaining Jarl and his men, while all I have are dried fish to keep me company." She patted the small stool beside her. Her hair shone in the firelight like spun gold. He'd never seen anything more beautiful. But he did not dare touch it. If a thrall touched the Jarl's daughter, he'd be dead by morning. So Fenrir took the stool and set it down across the fire from her. "Would you like me to sing for you, Miss Astrid?" She laughed so hard she nearly choked. "By all the gods, no. A dying seagull sings sweeter than you. Or me, so at least we have that in common. No. Tell me tales of what has been happening outside these four walls. Father has insisted I cannot leave while our guests are here. Is it true that Jarl's men are giants?" Fenrir shook his head. "They are no bigger than any of our men. In fact, I think Bjorn is easily twice the size of some of theirs. No wonder your father agreed to allow them inside the fort. Bjorn by himself could conquer the lot of them." She sighed as she set her brush down, and began to braid her hair. "Yet father feels it is too dangerous for me to venture out of the door, where they might see me." Fenrir grinned. "Of course. You are his greatest treasure. If even one of Jarl's men glimpsed you, he would lose his mind out of love for you, and every man would go mad to possess you. Better to be safe here than stuffed in a sack and stolen." "I know, but—" She bit her lip. "Don't tell my father I said this, but the longer he keeps me cooped up in here, the more I begin to wonder if maybe it would be better to take the risk. To ask for adventure. To be stolen by the right man, a warrior who would protect me so well I need not hide like I have to here." Astrid shook her head. "Or maybe I am simply going mad myself, stuck in here. Forget I said anything. One walk along the beach would cure me of such crazy ideas, but I do not know how long I must wait until father allows it. I have no such orders. He only told me to protect you. If I were to take you down to the beach, surely he would not mind. Everyone is in the big longhouse at the feast, and will be for hours yet. We could be back before anyone knew we'd gone." Astrid's eyes lit up. "Would you?" Fenrir could refuse her nothing. "Of course, Miss Astrid." Which was why the walk on the beach, admiring the moonlight mirrored in the still waters of the bay, turned into a short boat trip to the small, rocky islet, so she might search for seabirds' eggs, though Fenrir knew there would be none, for he'd collected them all himself in the week before the feast. In the end he walked with her up and down the tiny beach beneath the islet's cliffs, watching the half-moon set over the waves. "So beautiful," Astrid breathed. "It's hard to see where the sky ends and the sea begins. Like the only land left is this little rock, with us on it, surrounded by a sea of stars." Lunacy touched him then, from the last rays of the setting moon. For surely if he'd had his wits about him, it never would have happened. The most beautiful part of this scene is you, Fenrir said before he kissed her. And by some miracle he did not deserve, Astrid kissed him back. One perfect moment, stretching forever in the stars. Until Astrid's mouth tore away from his, even as she clung to him. "What's that?" she whispered. Fenrir ducked his head. Her kiss had aroused him so much, he hadn't been able to help himself. He was standing to attention for her, ready to bed her if she but said the word. "Forgive me, Miss Astrid, but your beauty and your kisses have driven me mad." "What are you talking about?" She stared at him. "I'm talking about those." She pointed out into the bay, where Fenrir could just discern boats gliding in silently with the waves. "Dozens of them. Must be some of the fishermen coming in late with their catch," Fenrir said. Astrid shook her head. "No, all our boats are pulled up on shore. Father insisted upon it, before Anjal arrived. Those can't be our men. We have to warn them." She drew in a breath, as if she meant to shout across the water. Fenrir seized her, clapping a hand over her mouth to silence her. "We can't," he hissed. "The fort is too far away. They won't hear us. But the invaders will, and there are 100 of them to 2 of us. They'll kill us both, and it will not slow them down at all. We must stay here silent and hide until it is safe." She bit down hard on his hand and tore out of his grasp. "You promised you would protect me. Now you turn coward when you might actually have to fight someone?" Yet it came out as a hissed whisper. She might not like it, but she knew she did not want the invaders to hear her. "I am protecting you, Miss Astrid. I cannot fight 100 men and win. Perhaps 10 or 20 or 50 will fall beneath my axe, but all it would take is one left alive to take you, and he will. For a man would be a fool indeed, to take one look at you, and not fall under your spell. Not even my father could fight 50 men single-handedly," she grumbled. "For you he would. As would I and any man who serves him. Do not underestimate the love and loyalty you inspire, Miss Astrid. If only love and loyalty would bring me a bed. I suppose we will have to stay the night here, on this beach?" she asked. "I will make up a bed for you in the boat, where you may sleep safely until morning," Fenrir promised. When she was safely tucked under a sailcloth blanket, she patted the space beside her. "You need sleep too, Fenrir." Madness truly had taken hold of him then, for him to share a bed with the Jarl's daughter. For when dawn lit the sky the next morning, it heralded Fenrir's death. 2. Traitor. Stealing my daughter away during the battle. What did Anjal's men promise you? Jarl Erik demanded. Fenrir wished he had the courage to tell Astrid's father to ask Anjal, but the pile of corpses on the beach told its own grisly story. Anjal and his men were dead, their sneak attack against Erik unsuccessful. At least Astrid was safe now. "I was protecting her like you told me," Fenrir said. He didn't see the blow coming, but it sent him reeling across the sand, to land at a pair of small feet. Fenrir dared to raise his head. Astrid? She would vouch for him, surely. But no, the feet were smaller than hers. These belonged to the witch, the old wise woman Erik consulted on important matters. Before Erik's men could haul him to his feet or land another blow, Fenrir heaved himself to his knees, grabbing the witch's hand. Something hard bit into his fingers, a ring with a large, red stone. Without thinking, Fenrir pressed his lips to it. "Please, Mistress Kuhn, you must believe me. I was only protecting Astrid. All I ever wanted was to protect Astrid. I will pledge my life to protecting her, if I am to be punished. Please. I ask only that you spare my life." The witch tried to pry him off, but desperation gave him strength. She managed to free her hand, but the ring came away in his fingers. "Save my life, make me her protector, and I will protect her for as long as I live," Fenrir said. The witch gritted her teeth, but she nodded once, stiffly, as though she did not want to. "Very well. Hand me back my ring, boy, and I shall grant your wish." Fenrir held it out to her on his open palm. "Thank you, Mistress Kuhn." She snatched the ring from him and slipped it back onto her finger, clenching her hand around it. Now I will turn you into her protector." She bit her lip hard, so a trickle of blood oozed out, her dark eyes staring at him. Pain stabbed at him, not once but 1,000 times, like she'd turned his bones to liquid fire. All Fenrir could do was scream until blessed darkness took him, and he knew no more. 3. Another battle, another victory. Fenrir had been the first prisoner her father had taken, but he was far from the last. But Astrid didn't dare disobey him. Under her father and Mistress Kuhn's gimlet gazes, she performed the foundation sacrifice ritual she'd first practiced on Fenrir's tortured body. She'd lost count of the number of hearts she'd cut out, but their names still rang in her head. Today, as she laid chunks of icy permafrost on each of their chests, she added 3 more names to her list: Thor, Loki, and Odin. Fierce warriors who would rise again to defend the fort they had dared to attack. Her father's warriors carried the fallen men to their graves, where they would lie until called to arms. Astrid kept her eyes on the burial, not daring to wash the blood and gore from her hands until the ritual was complete. She could feel Fenrir's eyes on her back as he stood apart from the others. As he had been, since the day Mistress Kuhn had turned him into a wolf-man, before she'd made Astrid cut out his heart to bind him to her as her protector. If it weren't for the binding, he probably would have torn her throat out years ago, and she'd probably deserve it too. She'd tried to tell her father the truth about that night, that Fenrir had been protecting her, but father had not believed a word of it. Now she suspected he had believed her, but he'd been so enraged that Fenrir had dared to kiss her, that her words had only made things worse. Whatever father's reason for it, he'd made his decision, and he would not release Fenrir as long as he lived. Fenrir might walk free among the other warriors now, but that was only because his grave, carved out of the rock on the small islet where they had spent that one blessed, cursed night, was closer to home than this lonely pass these new warriors were to guard. Finally, the burial was over, and Astrid trudged after her father, down from the wind-swept plateau. Warriors before and behind her, and Fenrir's eyes boring into her back. They couldn't get to the islet fast enough, where she would have to command him to return to his slumber, before her father's warriors placed the cover stone back over his prison. 4. This was her father's punishment for daring to favor a man without her father's permission, Astrid knew, as she trudged up the beach to Fenrir's stony prison. She hadn't kissed another man since that night with Fenrir, and she almost wished she hadn't kissed him. Perhaps if she'd restrained herself, he might still be a man instead of a monster, and father wouldn't have forced her to sacrifice warriors to become his invincible stone army. She'd once dreamed of being a warrior maiden, but if she never had to cut another heart out again. Fenrir stopped at the edge of the pit. He was going to make her say it, wasn't he? Instead of going willingly, he was going to wait for her to command him, like the enchanted slave he was. He definitely regretted that kiss all those years ago. She only had to see the murder in his eyes to know that if the curse ever broke, she'd be his first target. She could almost feel his deadly claws closing around her throat, squeezing until she could scarcely breathe, so strong she couldn't pry him off. No, wait, those claws were real, sharp points burning as they drew blood, just a drop to tell her he was serious. How? Stay back or I'll tear out her throat, Fenrir growled, his grip tightening. If she couldn't breathe, she couldn't speak, and she certainly couldn't order him into his prison. Let the girl go. Astrid's vision was going grey, so she couldn't be sure which of father's warriors had spoken. She reached down and drew her dagger. It couldn't kill Fenrir, but it could certainly hurt him. Hopefully enough to make him let her go. I'll only go back in that hole if she comes with me, Fenrir snarled. Buried alive? She'd die. Even if he didn't slice her to ribbons first. Traitor! You swore you'd protect her. That was father. That was before she cut out my heart. Now she's my price. I will return to my prison, but only if she goes with me. Astrid had her dagger out now. She angled it so it would catch him low in the belly. She might not be a warrior, but she knew how to gut a fish. She rammed her fist backward, until the blade could go no further, expecting blood to flow over her hand, but there was nothing. Instead, the blade clattered to the stone. "Stop fighting me," he hissed in her ear. As if she would obey him. "Your father means to give you to Orm when you get home," Fenrir whispered. Astrid stilled. Orm was Enjal's bastard half-brother, the man who'd betrayed Enjal to father the night of the attack. So father had been warned and victorious. Orm had fought among father's warriors ever since, bringing back women on every raid. Women who did not live long after they arrived. Fenrir loosened his grip around her throat, as if sensing her sudden cooperation. Astrid swallowed. "I will go with him." "No," father said. "My daughter is mortal. If she goes with you, she will die." The witch appeared, as if by magic. "I will enchant the girl, so she will survive." Fenrir did not let go of Astrid as Mistress Kuhn marched forward, muttering something as she daubed first her own blood, then Astrid's on the necklace Astrid had inherited from her mother. "Don't lose it, girl," the witch said before stepping back. "There. The spell is complete. When the wolfman wakes again, so shall she." Astrid had only a moment to sigh in relief, before Fenrir's arms wrapped tightly around her. Then he jumped into the pit. Father's warriors rushed forward, throwing buckets of ice and water down on top of them, and everything went dark. 5. "Help me please, I can't find it." Her voice panicked and desperate. Fenrir could not help but wake and want to help. "What have you lost?" "My necklace. My wolf necklace, the one that belonged to my mother." Fenrir could see the ivory carving in his mind's eye, for he'd seen it sitting on Astrid's breast every day of her life. He eyed the watery pit where they'd slept. All the ice had melted. It must be a particularly hot summer this year. Not that it mattered to him, hot or cold, he was living stone and he would endure. He dived in. Finally, he found it, half buried in the sand at the bottom of the hole, with only a few shreds of what used to be the woven cord that held it in place around Astrid's neck. He'd probably damaged it with his claws when he'd threatened her. "I found it, but the necklace is broken. I will make you a new one. One that does not break so easily," Fenrir promised. He leaped out of the hole, and turned to offer the carving to her. Astrid shrieked and tried to cover herself, but not before he'd gotten an eyeful. Oh, the gods were smiling on him today. Reluctantly, he turned his back. "I usually keep a spare tunic and cloak in the boat. They'll probably be too big for you, but at least it'll be something." He had fur to keep him warm, after all. "There's a boat?" Ah, she did not have his night vision. Fenrir found the boat easily, but the cloak had hardened, like someone had left it out in the sun. When he touched it, it cracked into pieces beneath his hand. Fortunately, it had protected the tunic, which had fared better. He held it out to Astrid. "Put it on while I push the boat out. Once we are ashore, I will find you proper clothing, as befits a Jarl's daughter." He heard the rustle of her dressing, and he hurried to get the boat onto the beach. "What if Orm's still there and father still wants me to marry him?" Astrid asked. Fenrir grinned. "Then they will both have to get through me before they can touch you. If you do not choose to marry the man, I promise you, they cannot make you." She climbed into the boat. "Then take me home please, Fenrir. I never did thank you for saving me from that slimy sea snake," Fenrir suggested. "I was thinking of more disgusting things, but a sea snake will do. Is this, when I call you for help, is this what you do? Wake and push the boat out and row ashore?" Fenrir grinned. "Sometimes. When the call is terribly urgent, like it was last time, I don't bother with the boat. I swim." Her eyes widened. "But the water's freezing." He looked away. "The curse keeps me from feeling the cold." He knew she felt guilty for casting it, though she'd had no choice, but he had to admit it had its advantages. He didn't need food or water or sleep or air, and his living stone skin was impervious to blades and arrows. His wolf form was superior to his human one, so he tended to stay furry most of the time. The claws came in handy. I wish the spell Mistress Coon cast on me kept out the cold. And you should take better care of your boat. It's letting in too much water. They weren't more than 100 yards from the islet, and Astrid was right. They were taking on water so fast, they weren't going to make it to the mainland short of swimming. Can you try to bail it out with something? All she had were her hands, but he had to give it to her. She did her best, though it wasn't enough. He paddled as fast as he could, but the paddles were almost as brittle as his cloak. One snapped in two, and he could feel the other threatening to give. We're going to have to swim, he said grimly, grabbing Astrid around the waist as the boat slipped beneath the surface. Her teeth were already chattering from the cold, and it was warmer beneath the surface than in the polar wind, though not by much. By the time they reached the beach, her movements were so sluggish, he was swimming for them both. Then his knees hit the sand, and he scooped her up into his arms and carried her to the village. Or where the village should have been. 6. Astrid awoke wrapped in the warmest furs. She couldn't remember getting new ones, but these were definitely her favorite this winter. Or whatever season it was. Which made no sense. It was summer, sliding into autumn, last time she remembered. Not winter. Definitely a good time for hunting and curing new furs. Only these furs were moving. Astrid scrambled away, putting as much distance as she could between herself and Fenrir the wolfman. How could she have slept in his arms after he'd threatened her? Only now did she remember the boat sinking and swimming, but she had no memory of making it to shore. He must have carried her. Good evening. You've slept through most of the day, but the sun will set soon. You should probably take a look outside before the light dies, Fenrir said. Outside? They weren't in a building. They were lying beneath a boat. One just like the one that had sunk, though it could not be the same one. Probably built by the same man, she told herself, as she crawled out into the afternoon light. She recognized the beach as the same one she walked along every morning as a girl, but the only boat there now was the one they'd slept under. Perhaps the others had gone out fishing or raiding. There should still be someone left in the village, though. Women, children, thralls and a few warriors to defend them, though the stout walls did most of the work. Walls where were they? The fort had always had walls, for as long as she could remember. Only now the walls and everything within them was gone. Where they should have been was an empty field of weeds, and no one. Astrid stumbled forward. This could not be. There must be something wrong with her eyes. The witch had turned the fort invisible, perhaps. She had only to step forward and she would touch the palisade, though she could not see it, and the illusion would break. For the islet in the bay was just where it had always been, and the beach, and the cliffs, and everything except the village, her family and everyone and everything she knew. 7. When the sun had set, and it was safe for Fenrir to emerge from the boat's shelter without his body turning to hard, immovable stone, he found Astrid on her knees, weeping, on the spot where Eric's longhouse should have been. Where are they? She implored, as if she thought he had the power to make an entire fort appear. Or disappear, as this one had. The boat, her things, the fragile oars, the state of his cloak. Fenrir had only one answer, and she would not like it. No more than he liked it, though it must be the truth. I think we slept for many years. Long enough for the fort to be gone, Fenrir said. Perhaps a bad storm destroyed it, or your father found somewhere better to build a stronger fort, or… Astrid was a Jarl's daughter. She did not shy away from the truth. Or the next attack was successful. But if they were attacked, why did they not call for your aid? Or wake me? I could have summoned you and the others, a whole army of warriors to defend the fort. Perhaps. We will not know unless we find someone we can ask, Fenrir said. Only there was no one here, no one for miles. Not even the scent of someone, however distant. We need to find someone and get you some clothes. We need to go up to the pass, to see if the other protectors are still where we buried them, and wake them, Astrid insisted. We're not going anywhere until you have clothes and some boots, Fenrir said. We'll head for the river until we find a cottage. Then, when you are dressed suitably for a hike up to the high pass, we will go and find these warriors of yours if you wish. Though I promise you, I am more than a match for any dozen warriors. Perhaps even 100, what with all the protection I have from the curse and all." She swallowed. "I'm sorry. I never should have told my father about our kiss. Or how we went out to the island. I tried to tell him you were protecting me, but he didn't believe me. It doesn't matter now. What matters is that we're alive, and that I find a way to keep you that way. We may have slept for years and the village might have moved, but one thing has not changed. As long as I live, I exist to protect you, and I will." "Thank you, Fenrir." She rose to her feet, dusting off her knees. "Lead the way to whatever signs of civilization you can find." 8. They walked half the night before Fenrir caught the faint scent of people, and longer still until they found the cottage that was the source of it. No lights, no smoke, no fire, and the most remarkable sheets of glass set in the walls, so that one might see out, or in, as was the case for Fenrir and Astrid. It seemed a shame to shatter one, but serves them right for leaving their cottage unguarded when there are raiders about, Fenrir said, as he punched through what turned out to be 2 sheets of the thin, clear glass. He helped Astrid climb through the window, before pulling the shutters closed behind him. Instinct had him wanting to light a fire or at least a candle, but the predawn light spilled through the gaps in the shutters, bright enough to see by. They'd reached shelter just in time. Astrid stumbled over to the bed, and slid beneath the blankets. It was every bit as soft and warm as the bed she'd slept in, inside her father's longhouse. Fenrir breathed a sigh of relief. At least he hadn't failed in his duties as her protector today. While she slept, for he had no need to do so, he prowled about the cottage, taking stock of anything they might use for a journey to the high pass, where the other cursed men were buried. There were countless glass windows and other glass sheets that had uses he could not discern. Several were fixed to walls, but all he could see through them was blackness. Most strange. Other sheets were backed with what appeared to be silver, and he could see his reflection clearly in them. By the gods, no wonder he terrified people. Well, everyone except Astrid, who feared nothing. He was the largest wolf he'd ever seen, with jaws that gaped wide enough to bite a man's thigh in two. His fur was frosted with salt from the sea. He found a brush and began to remedy this, before setting the brush aside for Astrid to use on her own hair when she woke. He found strange clear bottles filled with water, though he had to bite the tops off before he could taste it, and confirm they were fresh enough to drink. He left these for Astrid too. Behind a pair of silvered glass doors he found a small room filled with clothing, all hanging up in neat rows like drying fish. Plenty of tunics and gowns and shirts for Astrid to choose from, though not a cloak to be seen. There were blankets enough that he could fashion cloaks for both of them from though, so he did not worry. Especially when he found not 1 pair, but a dozen pairs of boots, as well as more delicate slippers. The kitchen mystified him. It was where he'd found the water and some boxes with pictures of food on the front, but it was mostly filled with strange, shiny things. There was more glass here than in the rest of the house combined, including one of the black glass screens. It was in a silver upright chest that he found food he recognized, though the door seemed to want to suck itself shut every time he opened it. This chest had its own light inside, illuminating a glass jar of preserved fish, and several kinds of vegetables too. Enough to feed Astrid for several days. More, if she could eat some of the things in the boxes with the pictures. Best of all, he found a box of necklaces, and chose a gold chain to thread through her ivory wolf charm. While braided cord might fray and perish, gold endured without tarnish. He tucked it into the pocket of the jacket he'd claimed for himself. He'd give it to her later, when she woke. He settled down on one of the enormous padded chairs, and for the first time since that fateful night, he did the one thing that was all he'd sworn he wanted, to guard and protect her. But as he watched her sleep, he wanted more. Another kiss, the feel of her body pressed against his, their limbs tangled together as she moaned his name, louder and louder until Fenrir closed his eyes. He dared not join her in the bed, though every fiber of his being begged for it. He'd sworn to be her protector, and that's what he'd do, protect her. Even from his own dark desires. 9. Fenrir had to admit, Astrid looked far finer in her stolen clothes than she ever had in his leather tunic. She'd chosen a red woolen dress that clung to her curves in all the right places, ending in a skirt so short he'd have called it a tunic if it wasn't most definitely a woman's gown. Beneath it, she wore finely woven leggings, most of which were covered by leather boots that came up to her knees. Over it all, she draped a midnight blue blanket, studded with stars, fastened with a wickedly sharp cloak pin that would double as a weapon if they were attacked. Watching her brush and braid her hair did alarming things to his nether regions. Things that made him drape his makeshift cloak across his lap to hide the evidence. Any man would be lucky to have her, and he was lucky to be her protector. Every time his thoughts strayed into the realm of dreams, where she might make him more than just her protector, he had to remind himself how lucky he was the way things were. They filled a bag with food and water, which he insisted on carrying, even if he would consume none of it, and set off along the wagon trail that led away from the cottage. He'd seen neither horse nor wagon at the cottage, but the wheel ruts confirmed the existence of a wagon, even if there were no hoofprints to be seen. Perhaps the rain had washed them away, so that only the wheel ruts remained. They followed the wagon tracks until they ended at something stranger than anything they'd yet seen, a stone road. "Have you ever seen such a thing?" Fenrir asked. Astrid shook her head, but she appeared thoughtful. "There are stories about invaders from the south, who built stone roads like this, long ago. But I never heard that invaders came so far north, or that they were still invading. The stories I heard say some of our own people followed the invaders home and conquered them, taking their lands for their own. Perhaps they came back and brought the stone roads with them." She did not know how much work went into making a stone floor, let alone an entire road, or one as smooth as this. The number of men and materials, and the time it would take to build such a road, one that ran as far as he could see in every direction, this was a marvel the like of which he had never seen before. How long must they have slept for such a thing to be done? A century at least. Maybe more. "Look, Fenrir, there are lights." He followed her pointing finger. There were, indeed, lights, growing larger every moment, until they were so big and blinding he could scarcely see the hulking shadow behind them. A monster as big as a longhouse, moving so fast he could scarcely credit it. And Astrid stood directly in its path. Fenrir shouted a warning, begging her to move off the road, but perhaps she did not hear him over the beast's roar as it charged. Fenrir didn't think, he raced onto the road, his only thought to push Astrid out of the beast's path. But he was too slow. The monster crashed into them, sending them both flying through the air, until they crashed to earth and everything went black. 10. Fenrir had fought in many battles since the day he'd been cursed into his current form, but this was the first time he'd actually hurt after one. Whatever that monster was, it was more than a match for him. Thankfully, when he opened his eyes, it was nowhere to be seen. He began to breathe a sigh of relief, only to realize he couldn't see Astrid anywhere either. Had the monster stolen her? Fury rose up within his chest. If it had, he would hunt it to the very ends of the earth, and make it give her back. If he had to slay the beast in the process, so be it. He would follow the road until he found its lair, and... Moonlight glittered on a midnight blue cloak, lying in a crumpled heap by the side of the road. Fenrir flew to her side, rolling her over so he might see her face. Heavy and limp, like she was sleeping, with a trickle of blood dribbling out the side of her mouth. "Astrid!" It came out as a whisper at first, so he repeated her name, louder and louder, until he was shaking her shoulders hard, so her head flopped from side to side, yet she still did not wake. Only then did he think to feel for her heartbeat. But all he found was silence. No beat, no breath. The monster had slain Astrid, while he, her protector, had failed to keep her safe. 11. She was so small and light in his arms as his pounding paws ate up the miles to the sea. He'd failed to protect her in life, but he would see to it that she received the funeral a Jarl's daughter deserved, in what might be the last of Eric's boats. A boat that had tried and failed to drown her, would carry her to Valhalla, to be with the rest of her father's warriors. A place he would never see, nor deserve. He laid her broken body on the sand, wiping away that telltale trickle of blood with the corner of his cloak. Then he dragged the boat over to her. She deserved to be laid to rest with weapons and flowers, along with all her worldly possessions, but those had all vanished, along with her father's fort. So he emptied out the bag he'd taken from the cottage. 3 knives, some bottles of water, and a lot of food she would never need again. Even as he laid her in the boat and arrayed her things around her, he knew it was not enough. Flowers he could find. It might be late summer, judging by the lack of ice on the ground, but there would be flowers still, he was sure of it. His steps led him to the fort gardens, where he'd grown and picked vegetables and herbs with the other thralls. The fort might be gone, but some of the plants remained, including the stubborn weeds that he'd plucked every year, but had grown back to spite him. He picked every flower he could find, until the bag was full. Only then did he dare approach her again. She lay in the bottom of the boat like she was only sleeping, wrapped in the starred cloak. He tugged her braid forward, curling it over her heart, where he placed a posy of foxgloves. Then he began to spread the rest of the flowers, until she looked like she was lying in a summer meadow on a carpet of blossoms. Beautiful as ever. Almost as though she still lived and breathed, though he knew she did not. Finally, he was finished. He had nothing left to give her but a proper burial. Truly, she deserved to go to her grave with his body at her feet, for failing her, but no blade could pierce his stone skin. His punishment was to go on living without her. Oh, the gods were surely laughing at him now, for daring to dream he might one day deserve her. He would drag the boat out into the bay, swimming with it so that it might reach deep water before it sank, carrying its precious cargo to the deeps. Perhaps if he was fortunate, the curse might break when Astrid left for Valhalla, making him once more nothing more than a mortal man. One who might drown in the currents out in the bay. He could only hope. For what had he to live for without Astrid? A man was more likely to be overwhelmed by the currents than a wolf, so a man he would be. For the first time since he had awoken in this time, Fenrir shifted from wolf to man. If he was but a man, he was weak, and he would take one thing for himself. Something he hadn't dared hope for, not once since he'd been cursed. But if these were his last moments, before he was doomed to spend eternity in Helheim, he would steal one last thing. He dropped to his knees beside the boat, leaned over the gunwale, and pressed his lips to Astrid's in one final cursed kiss. 12. Everything hurt, like she'd been in a fight that Astrid could not remember. A fight she definitely had not won, for Valhalla surely would not hurt so much. Nor would it be so dark. Helheim maybe. Until she felt Fenrir's lips on hers, for they could belong to no one else. Not Helheim and not Valhalla, so she lived on Midgard still. Astrid's eyes fluttered open. It was Fenrir all right, as a man and not a wolf. How? But as his lips claimed hers, she ceased to care about or question anything, except how good it felt to be in Fenrir's arms again, and how much more she wanted from him. With her father and the village gone, he was all she had left. Was it wrong to want more? His body was hard and heavy atop hers, but no more than she could bear. His hands were warm as they stroked up her belly to cup her breasts beneath her dress. Yes, she whispered as one hand slid down. Yes. His claws shredded her leggings, so cold air kissed the tops of her thighs, and the parts of her that lay between. Before warm fingers stroked her there too. Yes, yes, she moaned, opening herself to him completely. The heat of him burned as he entered her, before he set her insides on fire too, in the best way. Over and over he plunged into her as she arched her back up to meet him, thrust for thrust. Pleasure came in a rush she was not prepared for, crying out his name as Fenrir gave her everything she could have ever wished for. When her body stopped shaking, she stared up at him, tears of joy blurring her vision. "Thank you. That was, I never imagined, and yet, I could do that all night." She felt her cheeks burn at admitting such a thing. His eyes were wide as he stared back, as though he could not believe her audacity either. Or so she thought. "You're alive. I thought you were dead. I was going to a proper funeral with a boat and flowers and weapons." He gestured along her sides. Only now did she see the flowers, and the things they'd taken from the cottage. Along with 3 knives he must have hidden from her, which he'd also taken, for he had not carried them on the islet. "How could you think I was dead? I was just unconscious," Astrid said, struggling to get up. She had no desire to lie in this funeral boat a moment longer. "Your heart no longer beat, and you did not draw breath. Your neck was broken. I felt it as I carried you," Fenrir said. Astrid's hand went to her neck, but it felt fine to her. Her heartbeat was rapid beneath her fingers, and her breath, well, she was still breathing hard from their lovemaking. Definitely breathing. "Perhaps Mistress Kuhn's spell," she began. "She said when she enchanted me, that I would survive. Whatever she did to me, stops me from dying. I am like you." Fenrir shook his head. "No, you are not a wolf, and you do not have stone skin. You still need food and water and sleep, and while your heart might have stopped beating, it beats once more. While I have no heart, for you cut it out and replaced it with stone." Now she could not stop the tears from falling. "I'm sorry, Fenrir. My father would have killed you if I didn't do as the witch wanted. I hoped." He hushed her. "I do not blame you for any of it. I am your protector, and honored to be so." Astrid shook her head. "My protector perhaps, but you are more than that now. What we just did, I would do over and over, every night for as long as we live." Fenrir glanced up at the sky. "But night will be over soon, and if I do not find shelter, the sun will turn me to stone, and I shall be no use to you then." Together they gathered up the supplies, before Fenrir tossed his cloak over his nakedness, and they ran all the way to the cottage. The window was still broken and no one was home, so when Astrid collapsed on the bed, she pulled Fenrir down beside her. Before she had caught her breath, she kissed him again, and this time their lovemaking went on for hours. 13. For a week they honeymooned in the cottage, until Astrid knew every inch of Fenrir's body almost as well as he knew hers. He turned from man to wolf to man again at her command, and he finally remembered to return her necklace to her, with the new gold chain. But once the week had passed, her resolve hardened, and they departed for the high pass again, more determined than ever to find the other warriors she'd cursed, so that she might ask them what had happened to her village. This time they carried a tent they'd made out of materials they'd found in the cottage, blankets thick enough to block out both sunlight and the cold, and ropes sturdy enough to keep the tent anchored even when their lovemaking threatened to shake the whole thing loose from its moorings and down upon their heads. Not that even that could stop them once they had begun. One night as they neared the pass, a bright light appeared in the sky, much like the one the monster had possessed, when it had nearly killed Astrid. Soon a roaring sound every bit as loud as the first monster reached them. Fenrir grabbed Astrid and raced out of the creature's path, taking shelter in a crevice between several rocks. The creature, or whatever it was, flew through the sky, passing them as though it had not seen them. "Is that a dragon?" Astrid asked, squinting up at the beast. Fenrir shrugged. "I have never seen a dragon, so I could not say. But whatever it was, it had a sort of whirling wheel on top of its body, and that's what made all the noise. The beast on the road did not have such a thing, did it?" He shook his head. "No. But its body was bigger than the flying monster, though both had blindingly bright lights. Maybe these monsters are the reason the village is gone. If even you could not fight them." "In a fair fight I might be able to," Fenrir said, glaring after the flying creature. If he were a normal man, Astrid might have laughed at such bravado, but he'd survived his battle with the first beast, when she had not. Perhaps Fenrir would be a match for it. especially with 3 more enchanted warriors to fight at his side. Astrid almost didn't recognize the entrance to the pass, for there was no snow or ice on the ground at all. In fact, there was even grass growing where there'd been nothing but frozen wasteland for as long as her people could remember. "They should be here," she said, staring at the 3 holes in the ground, too regular to be anything but graves. "Where are they?" "You're the expert on enchanted warriors, not me. I just happen to be one of them," Fenrir said. He was right, of course. Digging up bodies was not how these warriors were summoned to battle. No, she actually had to call them. This was why she remembered their names. Thor, Loki, Odin. "Come to my aid, for I have need of you. Thor, Loki, Odin, wake and ready for battle, for I need your help. Thor, Loki, Odin, rise, for I summon you." 3 times she called, her voice rising to a shriek on the 3rd attempt, but as her ringing tones faded away, there were still only 2 of them on the plain at the entrance to the pass. "Hey you! What are you doing here? This is a protected archaeological site. Get out of there right now before you damage something, or worse, contaminate the site." The angry voice belonged to a tall, round man with 2 pieces of glass fixed in a frame on his face, before his eyes. Astrid had never seen anything like it. "Do you understand what he's saying?" Fenrir asked. Astrid shook her head. The strange man flapped his arms as though trying to shoo chickens out of the kitchen gardens. "I think he wants us to leave," Fenrir said. "And go where?" "This is where the bodies were buried. This is where we will find answers. Nowhere else. I am not leaving until I find out what happened to my village." Astrid planted her feet and folded her arms across her chest. "Where are the men you found here?" she demanded. "We've only found 1 man, and we sent his body to the university research labs back in town," the man said. "You have to leave. This is a protected site. Perhaps one of the greatest finds of the decade. Archaeologists only." He patted his chest, then made more shooing motions. "We're not leaving until I have some answers. These archaeologists, or whatever they are, have no idea what they're dealing with," Astrid said. She turned to Fenrir. "Right." He gripped her hand. "Right. We stand together, whatever may come." This has been Fenrir, a Paranormal Protector tale. A Tale in the Heart of Ice series. Written by Demelza Carlton.